I'm your host, Mark Good, and this is Remarkable, a podcast focused on people and stories worthy of your attention. And now, today's show.
I will tell you that, having been a general manager, your superiors, when they are male, which I always found this kind of fascinating. They always want, lots of terms of endearments, right? Sweetie and honey, and they hug you when they see you, and as opposed to shake your hand, right? If you put your hand out, it's very uncommon for them to want, they're like, nah, bring it in. I'm like, do you hug your male employees like this? This is not appropriate. If they push us a little too far, we kind of say, well, isn't a woman's role to be in the kitchen? So that shouldn't be such a surprise.
That is too funny. Oh, touche. I never thought about that. A woman's role to be in the kitchen. Oh my God, you turned it on its head.
Typically, it's just, listen, you've made your server very uncomfortable by saying things that, they're uncouth. And so at this point, we've decided to end your dining experience. We will not be offering dessert. Here's your check. I hope you have a good evening.
That was Kristina Good, co-owner of Market Steer Steakhouse, a fine dining establishment in Santa Fe, New Mexico. In today's episode, we discuss how gender bias has impacted her career, from raising funds to start her restaurant to interacting with landlords and contractors. We also discuss sexual harassment, not only directed at her, but at members of her staff. Join me and learn how Kristina has overcome unique challenges as a woman co-owning and managing a steakhouse, a domain traditionally dominated by men. I'm back with my guest, Kristina Good-Crook, co-owner, co-founder, and general manager of Market Steer Steakhouse in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Kristina, in a previous episode, we talked about your journey from being a hostess at a Chili's in Dallas when you were 15 to now being a co-owner and a co-founder of this incredible Market Steer Steakhouse, I call it a white tablecloth, a luxury high-end restaurant. But one of the things that's interesting about that journey, particularly about at Santa Fe, although I want to ask you about your entire career, being a woman co-owner, being a woman founder, being a woman in the restaurant industry brings with it some unique challenges. Would that be a fair thing for me to say?
Sure. Listen, I am not a victim of my gender. I will tell you that right off the bat, but it does come with sort of annoyances more than anything of how I have been treated, how we are treated as female business owners in this industry, especially a steakhouse, which is a male-dominated cuisine, right? Steakhouses are it's an American celebratory meal, right? You get a promotion, you cook a steak, right? It's your anniversary, you're going to go out to a nice steak dinner. And in the past, you've got this big male executive chef, right? You're having your business meeting, big glass of cab with the guys. It's not a female environment, right? We're not talking about a seafood or a vegetarian restaurant, which you would typically say is probably female owned, right? Steakhouses are predominantly owned by men. So it is definitely something that has been something that we have had to sort of navigate through, which is just sort of.
So, okay, you talk about it being annoying, but so give us some examples of, in the previous episode, you talked about how you spent a lot of your formative years of your career in Aspen and also in Manhattan. And then you and Kat decided, hey, we want to open our own restaurant. We want to do it in New Mexico. We don't know exactly where. So you moved to, as you call it, southern New Mexico. For those who don't know, Artesia, tiny little town, right? In the middle of Nowheresville, right? Beautiful place, I might add. And then you said, we were on the money hunt. So you raised money, right? Did did gender play a role at all in money raising? I mean, did you find it difficult to raise money because you were two women who were starting a restaurant? Was that, I mean, did you get no's because of gender, do you think?
There is a study that typically loans are only given out to female owned businesses about 2.5% of the time.
Wow.
So it certainly wasn't spoken. When we met with multiple bankers and brought, I can't tell you how many business plans and pro formas, and this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to succeed. And their biggest concern was even if you come with this amount of money, how are you going to make the rest of the money? And of course, Kat and I's answer, maybe we were naive. We were like, well, we're going to work. We're going to work. We're going to work the business. And they said, that's not good enough. You need to have a supplemental income in order to pay back this, $100,000 or whatever it is we were asking for. So, I think I can't speak to whether or not that was the reason that we didn't get money. I will tell you that, having been a general manager, your superiors, when they are male, which I always found this kind of fascinating, they always lots of terms of endearments, right? Sweetie and honey, and they hug you when they see you, and as opposed to shake your hand, right? If you put your hand out, it's very uncommon for them to want, they're like, nah, bring it in. I'm like, do you hug your male employees like this? This is not appropriate. Or, of course there has always been, and there will always be some sort of underlying sexual harassment in, whether it be in the kitchen, culture, or in the front of the house. And for myself, I can only speak to that. It's just creating a boundary right off the bat of, at first you kind of brush it off, right? You're like, no, we are not going to engage in that sort of dialogue. And no, those things are certainly not going to happen between us. And then you try to reroute and make sure that you're going back to the conversation at hand, right? And as women, we're sort of preconditioned to just understand that that's a part of it and do what we can to brush it off, because if we are going to be successful, if we raise a red flag and say this is a problem, then we're causing a fuss and ultimately will be penalized for it. And so we have to put a smile on our face and endure that and say what we can to protect not only ourselves, but our position, to not hurt our ability to be promoted and to move forward. Whenever we took over in the hotel, the owners of the hotel, two males, they were nice enough. But every time they came in, they, hugged and would put their arm around me and say, oh, we're just so proud of you girls, which meant nothing to us. They didn't cook the food. They weren't an investor in the business. They did nothing to help us succeed other than allow us to rent a property, but felt like it was important to let us know that just us girls, that we were actually doing it. And they found that to be pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's pretty patronizing and condescending. I got to tell you, in my own career, the best managers I ever had at places like IBM and elsewhere were always women. The best business partners I had were women. And I don't know why that's true. It just was true. But I never thought about the fact that the cuisine that you serve at your restaurant, being a steak, you're right. That's kind of I don't want to call it a guy thing. I haven't really thought about it before, but you're right. There is sort of almost a masculine undertone to that kind of. Well, it's like you cook a steak on the grill, right? And that's what guys do. I don't want to say that because your wife's a marvelous exception.
Yeah, but they don't make aprons that say grill master for women.
Okay.
It's that is, look, gender roles are real. Like this is a society thing that has been, that have been developed for generations and decades, right? The men cook the meat. That's the guy's role. And so in a steakhouse, it's uncommon to have a female take that role and ultimately do it better. And we get that all the time. That is the number one comment that we have is men will say, I cook a really good steak at home and I usually don't go out to steakhouses because I do it best, because everybody has their idea of what is the best steak. And so when they come in and they have a steak that is I don't want to necessarily say superior, but is better than what they can cook at home for them. And then they find out that it's a female, they're always very surprised, to which, if they push us a little too far, we kind of say, well, isn't a woman's role to be in the kitchen? So that shouldn't be such a surprise.
That is too funny. Oh, touche. I never thought about that. A woman's role to be in the kitchen. Oh my God, you turned it on its head.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So let's go back to the sexual harassment thing, because in reading that I've done over the last, 2 to 3 years, there have been some pretty high-profile scandals associated with restaurateurs, owners of restaurants, if you will, some of them in Manhattan, New York, right,
Sure.
that have just horribly harassed female employees, and all kinds of awful stories come out about that. Do you feel like, because you've described almost what I would call this dance that you've had to do in your career and just listening to you, there's a part of me, okay, so this is, you know me, this is kind of how I'm wired, right? I listen to you and I go, okay, so you deflect these comments, you redirect the conversation, and as you put it, I don't want to be considered a problem employee, so I'm not going to raise the flag of sexual harassment, whatever. So there's a part of me that goes, wow, I bet you have developed some really good skills as a result of having to manage through that minefield all the time, right? But on the other hand, that's a lot of overhead to have to carry because you're female, just because you're of your gender, right? It has nothing to do with your skills. It's just because you're female, and from my point of view, you're attractive, right? So you're going to get attention, right? So, I mean, do you ever kind of go, God, this is a pain in the butt? Or have you just sort of resigned yourself to go, no, it's just the way it is?
Well, I think it's both. I mean, we, as young women, as girls, you know that your sexuality is something that you can be a victim of, or you can control it, right? I mean, I'm sure there is somewhere in the middle, but and maybe there is a little bit of both, right? I still walk to my car with my keys in between my knuckles in case somebody wants to come behind me so I can punch them with that, right? I mean, we are preconditioned to protect ourselves. And so it is a part of it, because that is, and I'm not saying that it's right, and I'm not resigned to just being what it is, but I'm also not going to be a victim of it. So I think that, to me, and not by any whistleblower that says that they have been harassed or that speaks up, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with it. But for me, I was fortunate in the situations. For me, having the ability to just deflect did not hurt. I was not personally emotionally injured or physically harmed, and I was able to navigate through the situation to where it also didn't hurt my career.
Yeah, that's incredible. So now let's go to your current restaurant. I want to look at it from your point of view looking down, which is towards your employees, and then I'm going to look at it from your point of view looking out to, in this case, your previous landlords. So, which we've talked about before. So when looking down, how do you create an environment? Because you talked about this in the previous episode about how important, and I'm going to use your word, soul is to what I want to call the value proposition of restaurant, to its competitive differentiation, to what really makes Market Steer a really magical place to eat, is that thing. How do you pay attention to this, issue of potentially, misconduct between employees? I mean, or whatever, people saying things that are offensive and inappropriate and all that. How do you manage that?
I would say in the moment. If there is ever nothing goes, I don't allow anything to permeate overnight or within the culture. So if there is an interaction that myself or a member of the team or a member of the management team notices, we attack it head on and in the moment. That way it doesn't have the opportunity to become something more, and that we can address it in real time, which is incredibly important and has been really great for our culture, because that way people not only feel protected, which is the number one thing I want to know in my work environment, that somebody is looking out for me and they believe me when I say this person's making me uncomfortable. And to be fair, I know we're talking about women, but I have most recently had a male employee, feel like he was being harassed by other male employees. And it was in a bullying sense, but it was sexual, but I think it can go absolutely to both genders. And there is that sort of preconceived notion that it's just females, but it is males too. And so we make sure that we are addressing it in the moment, in real time, so that people know that they are safe and that we are making sure that their well-being is of the utmost importance.
How do you, I don't know if this has ever happened, but how do you help employees when a client, gets on them, says something inappropriate, does something inappropriate? How do you manage that? And do customers respond to you? And again, I want to go to your gender, because you're female, not male, right? So you're not the guy walking out, right, with the deep voice and the gravelly beard or whatever, right? You're a female owner. So how do you handle it? Has that happened? And if so, how do you handle that?
On more occasions than I'd like to remember, I like to wear heels. And I like to wear skirts because it makes me feel powerful and pretty. And those two, I just want to feel when I'm at work, right?
Sure.
And so, first of all, we have a zero tolerance policy for any sort of harassment. And so if a female or a male server comes to me and says, this person's making uncomfortable, the first thing that we do is remove them from the table and replace them with a new server. And then if that behavior continues, we try to do everything kind of behind the scenes before we start confronting the guests. We want to give them an opportunity to change and say, we're going to remove this server. We're going to put somebody else on it. Hopefully they can continue their dining experience. If that doesn't work, then we will go over to the table, and it's usually myself, depending on, I do have a few male managers. And so we kind of re-gauge the situation to see which person or gender, I guess, they would respond best to. If they are males that are harassing a female server, depending on how they respond to her being removed from the table, will determine whether or not it's myself or a male manager that approaches the table. And typically it's just, listen, you've made your server very uncomfortable by saying things that, they're uncouth. And so at this point, we've decided to end your dining experience. We will not be offering dessert. Here's your check. We hope you have a good evening. We just try to keep it as really clean and simple. I was harassed by an older gentleman who was very handsy and very vocal about what he wanted to do. And because it wasn't appropriate for me to go up to the table, we actually had a male manager go over and end their dining experience. And they were like, what's the problem? And they told him, and they were like, we're just joking. She should get over it. Like, it's not a big deal. You probably shouldn't dress like that. It's her fault anyways. And so we asked them to leave after the check was dropped.
Wow, that's tough. I'm glad you guys have process and procedures. And, when I asked the question, I didn't know how much experience you've had with it. It's regrettable that it is more common than I would have expected. But we live in a time, I guess, when those sorts of manners sometimes get left behind.
Well, and so funny to me that it's typically men that are a little bit older that feel like there is a generational difference where my generation and even the generation behind me after me is far more woke or aware of how you should and shouldn't treat. And there are men, especially men with a significant amount of money, who don't feel the need to. Women are just pieces, right? They're bodies, they're not minds. They're there to serve you visually, and they're there to serve you physically. And that is certainly how a lot of women are treated by men of a certain age.
Yeah, and of a certain net worth. My experience has been that people, and this isn't just about this, sexual harassment, but there are people who reach a certain asset base or income level that believe that they can bend the rules or the rules don't apply. And then you mix gender into that and it can get pretty ugly. Now looking outward, so you guys are in the process of remodeling. Tell me what it's been like again as two female owners who are now managing, a supply chain. I mean, you've got a general contractor, you've probably got a designer. I mean, what's that been like? Has there been anything associated with your gender or female orientation that's come up in that process?
I think our contractors, they told me this today. Actually, I had a site meeting and they said that not only are we the handiest women that they have ever met, but that we are more resourceful than they're used to. And so I think, which I take both as a compliment. I like to be handy, right? Who doesn't like to fix something? We're in our mid 40s. We own a commercial building. We do have a contractor and an interior designer. And, I guess it's uncommon for women either of our age or just women in general to be in a position of authority over a significant amount of, quite a few men. So it was in the beginning just we have a tremendous amount of respect for their trade and what they're doing. But as we've gotten closer to the completion, we've had to become a little bit more vocal and opinionated about what our expectation is, which I think for them has been a challenge. But for the most part, they understand who signs the checks, and so they make us happy. But yeah, there are moments where, grown men, I swear, they have a hard time controlling their emotions more than most women I've met. I've realized that through this process.
That is so funny. Well, listening to you, and again, I'm reflecting on some of the insights and comments you made in our previous episode about the skills that are required for what I call the customer-facing side of your business, which you manage as the GM and managing all the floor managers, all that stuff. And then, as we just talked about with, uncouth, unruly guests, there's a set of people skills that you've developed over the years, which I would think have come in pretty handy during this process of managing this remodeling process of your new venue, right?
Yeah, you mentioned that you thought that some of your best leaders were females, and I kind of chuckle on the inside because it's okay for women to be empathetic, right? Men, I feel like are raised to not have that sense of empathy. They are, you are in a position of authority, you are the boss, you are the man, you are in charge. Whereas women, I think, can navigate it a little bit better because I don't have an overinflated sense of self. I'm hungry for success. I want to, have these accomplish as much as I can. And I know I need people to help me get there. And so when we navigate through this, especially through the construction part of it, there's a lot of egos where one of myself or Kat has to step in and say, hey, listen, we respect both of you or all of you. You have a tremendous amount of experience between the two, and you bring a lot of value to the project. However, we have to take a step back and make sure that what we're arguing is for the betterment of the project, not for one individual ego over the other. And I think women have a better ability to do that because we are sort of raised to be more empathetic than men are.
Well, I think there's also a lot of data that shows that, and this is certainly true in leadership positions, women are able to achieve, with whatever constituency they're a part of, a consensus much faster and better than men. Men tend to be competitive. This is your point about ego, and there's a lot of conflict associated with male leadership, right? You see this in politics. I mean, women, and there are exceptions to this, Maggie Thatcher was an exception, but most of the women are marvelous at achieving consensus. And they know how to get everybody around the table, and they know how to get everybody nodding in the same direction at the same time. And it sounds like that's sort of what you're doing in this construction process, because the magnitude of what you guys are doing is substantial, and there's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of suppliers in your supply chain. And not everything moves smoothly all the time. So there's going to be conflict. There's going to be friction. And I would think that those traits that you've just articulated, as being female, right? And also probably from my point of view, as I listen to you, part of, your experience, again, in the restaurant industry helps you to pull all that together, to herd the cats, as it were, even though they're all male.
Right.
or many of them are. Right?
Yeah.
So,
And some of this stuff doesn't ever go away. I mean, I the first year that we were open, I didn't wear a suit and I got mistaken as the hostess. And the second year I decided I'm only going to wear suits, and then people started thinking that I was the manager. But, and so little thing, we were standing outside of the building yesterday with our interior designer, who is a male, and it was myself and Kathleen and our designer, and a couple walked up, husband and wife. And when they were asking questions about the restaurant, they only spoke to him. And although Kat and I were answering all of the questions, they still just looked at him, shook his hand. Both of them said, "We can't wait to see your restaurant and for your restaurant to open," and walked away. And we were both just kind of flabbergasted. Like, every question you had for him, we were the ones answering it, but didn't acknowledge the fact that we were the owners of not only the building, but the restaurant, and kind of walked away. And we were both just like, well, I guess, I mean, like I said in the beginning, I'm not a victim of my gender. This is how the world is right now, whether I like it or not. Would I like to change it? Absolutely. I think we are changing. There's been some real positive movements, but it is a part of our everyday life. And what we do to sort of combat that and battle that is to show up every day and produce the best service that we can, and to put out the greatest plate of food, and hopefully create a beautiful atmosphere where people want to come. And eventually they'll figure out that it's owned by two women, and that's just going to be okay.
Well, and to the wonderful touche that you do, hey, if a woman's place is in the kitchen, all right.
Right.
Well, listen, Kristina, this has been really wonderful and insightful. You have a very grounded attitude about all this, and props to you. That's great.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, listen, thanks again, and we look forward to getting an update after you open. I'll get you back on the show.
That sounds great. Thanks for having me.
I'm Mark Good. You've been listening to my remarkable podcast. For more episodes like this, as well as premium content, visit my site, markgood.substack.com.